In the glass towers of Manhattan, her name is not spoken casually. When a billion-dollar corporation sees her name on a summons, their stock price drops before the first hearing. She does not negotiate. She does not compromise. She does not take a case she has not already won. They call her the Hunter Killer. And the story of who she is and what made her begins not in a courtroom, but in the ruins of everything her family built. Welcome to Corporate Chaos Scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing is off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like, because we bring you stories like this every week. Her name is Mera Luna, 44 years old, the founder and managing partner of Luna Legal Group, a litigation firm with offices in Manhattan, Washington, D.C., and Chicago that employs 37 attorneys and support staff, and that has, in 11 years of operation, maintained an unbroken record of plaintiff victories in every case it has taken to trial. 100%. 31 trials. 31 verdicts. This number is not an anomaly. It is a methodology. Mera Luna has never lost a trial because she does not go to trial on a case she has not already solved. By the time she walks into a courtroom, she has spent months constructing a case that has no viable defense. She knows the opposing arguments before the opposing attorneys have formulated them. She knows the holes in the documentation. She knows the footnote buried in a clinical trial report from a decade ago. She knows the email that the company's legal team believes was deleted, and that was not, in fact, deleted, because almost nothing is ever truly deleted if you know where to look. She has been described in an industry publication that profiled her 3 years ago as the most feared litigator of her generation. The profile noted that her approach to a case was less like legal preparation and more like siege warfare. She identified every point of structural weakness in a target's position and systematically destroyed each one before the first day of proceedings. By the time the defendant sat across from her in a courtroom, the building was already down. They were simply watching it fall. This reputation, this methodology, this specific quality of relentless forensic intelligence applied to the destruction of corporate wrongdoing. None of it was born in a seminar or developed through a clerkship. It was born in a small manufacturing town in western Pennsylvania 24 years ago, when a 12-year-old girl watched the most unbeatable lawyers she had ever imagined bury her father under paperwork until there was nothing left. Mera's father, Miguel Luna, ran a precision parts manufacturer that he had built over 20 years in a town that needed it. It was not a glamorous business. It did not make products anyone had heard of. It made components, small, exact, high-tolerance components, for larger manufacturers in the automotive and aerospace supply chains. 22 employees at its peak. A building her father owned outright. A reputation for consistency and quality that had taken 20 years to build and that was worth, to the clients who depended on it, significantly more than any individual contract could express. The chemical company was a regional facility operating approximately 4 miles upstream from the Luna manufacturing plant and from the residential neighborhoods where most of its employees lived. The company had been operating there for 30 years. It processed and stored a range of industrial chemicals, some of them hazardous, all of them subject to environmental regulations that required specific disposal and containment protocols. For 11 years, the company had been quietly disposing of its wastewater in a manner that did not comply with those protocols. Not through ignorance, the internal documentation that Mera would, 20 years later, obtain through a civil discovery process, established with complete clarity that multiple levels of management had been aware of the disposal practice and had made the calculation that the cost of remediation was greater than the cost of continued non-compliance, adjusted for the probability of detection. The contamination entered the water table slowly. It entered the drinking water supply of the town's residential areas over a period of years. The health effects manifested gradually, which made them difficult to attribute initially: elevated rates of certain respiratory conditions, a cluster of neurological cases in children, a pattern of illness among adults that the regional health authority investigated and could not immediately source. Miguel Luna was not the first person to notice the pattern, but he was among the first to make the connection between the pattern and the upstream facility, because he was the kind of man who paid attention, and because the illness cluster was concentrated disproportionately in the area immediately downstream of the facility's drainage field. He spoke to a lawyer. Then he spoke to several. Then he found one who was willing to file. What followed was 3 years of litigation, during which the chemical company deployed a team of 8 attorneys against a solo practitioner representing a coalition of affected residents and small businesses. They buried the plaintiffs in discovery requests. They filed motions that required responses that consumed weeks of preparation. They obtained delays, extensions, and adjournments through a process of procedural attrition that was designed not to win on the merits, but to exhaust the plaintiffs' resources until the coalition collapsed. Miguel Luna's business, which had been dealing simultaneously with the water contamination's effect on his facility's processes and the cost of contributing to the litigation, went under in the 2nd year of the case. He sold the building to cover the remaining obligations. He moved his family to a smaller house. He worked at a parts store for the remainder of his working life. The case settled, eventually, for a fraction of the actual damage. The chemical company's attorneys had correctly calculated that the plaintiffs had run out of money before they ran out of fight. Mera was 12 when this began. She was 15 when it ended. She had watched every year of it. She had understood, at 12, that the attorneys on the other side were better equipped than the attorney on her father's side. By 15, she had understood why, not because they were more intelligent, but because they had more resources, more time, more procedural experience, and a systematic willingness to use the process itself as a weapon rather than a vehicle for truth. She had decided, in the specific cold clarity of a 15-year-old who has watched her family's life dismantled by people who were very good at their jobs, that she would learn their game better than they had ever played it. She worked 3 jobs to finance her undergraduate degree, not as a narrative flourish, as a fact. She worked mornings at a diner, evenings at a retail stockroom, and weekends at a cleaner's that serviced commercial premises. She maintained a grade point average that secured her a partial scholarship to law school. She maintained that grade point average through law school while continuing to work, now at a different configuration of jobs, while studying at a pace that her classmates found, when they became aware of it, either admirable or alienating. She was not warm in law school. She was not there to be warm. She was there to learn the mechanics of the game she had watched destroy her father's life, and she was learning them with the specific, cold efficiency of someone who has a use for what they are learning rather than an abstract interest in it. She graduated in the top 2% of her class. She joined a major corporate litigation firm as a junior associate. Not because she had any intention of defending corporations. She had no such intention, but because the largest and most sophisticated legal machinery available to the people who had buried her father operated from exactly these firms, and she intended to understand it from inside. She spent 4 years at the firm. She learned more in those 4 years than she had in 3 years of law school, because theory and practice in law are not the same education, and because the practice available to a junior associate at a major corporate firm, the scale of the discovery, the complexity of the motions practice, the strategic depth of the defense architectures she was helping to construct, was a masterclass in exactly the game she needed to understand. She also learned something about the people playing it. She had expected to find the enemy, and what she found instead was more nuanced. People who were, most of them, competent professionals operating within a system that rewarded the outcome their clients were paying for. They were not monsters. They were practitioners. And the thing she understood watching them work was that their formidability came from a very specific source: arrogance. The assumption that the other side would not see what they were doing because the other side was not as smart or as resourced or as patient. They were arrogant. That was the structural weakness, and Mera Luna intended to exploit it. Her first significant case, which she took as a junior associate on an evening and weekend basis in a manner that required the approval of a senior partner who respected her ability enough to allow it, was against a major pharmaceutical company. An adverse event data suppression case. The company had, in a clinical trial submitted to the FDA a decade prior, redacted certain adverse event data from a subset of patients in a way that the redaction notation indicated was for commercial sensitivity reasons, rather than the clinical reasons for which redaction was authorized. Nobody had found the footnote. The redaction notation was in a supplementary appendix to a supplementary document filed as part of a regulatory submission package that ran to thousands of pages. The company's attorneys had not flagged it in their discovery responses because, based on all available evidence, they were not aware that anyone had found it or that anyone was looking. Mera had found it. She had spent 4 weeks reading every page of the publicly available regulatory submission because she had a hypothesis about where the buried thing was, and she was prepared to read 4,000 pages to prove it. The footnote demonstrated, once properly decoded against the regulatory documentation framework, that the company had knowingly submitted incomplete safety data as complete safety data. The verdict was $400 million. Her name was in the legal press the following morning. The senior partner at the firm called her into his office. He said she had done exceptional work. He said the firm was proud of her. He said he would like to discuss her future at the firm. She handed him a letter of resignation. She had drafted it the previous evening after the verdict had come in. She said, "Thank you for everything I've learned here. I know how to play the game now. I'm going to play it for the other side." She went home and opened Luna Legal Group the following Monday morning. The 11 years since that Monday morning have produced 31 trials and 31 verdicts. The cases have included an energy company that had been quietly falsifying emissions data while lobbying against climate regulation, a tech conglomerate that had stolen and implemented proprietary AI training data from thousands of independent developers without compensation or acknowledgement, a hospital system that had systematically overbilled Medicare across 4 states over a decade, and a private equity firm that had looted the pension fund of a regional manufacturing company during an acquisition and structured the corporate entity to make the liability disappear. In every case, the opposing legal team had arrived at the courtroom believing they understood the case. In every case, they were wrong. Not because they were incompetent, many of them were excellent attorneys, but because they had not understood that they were not fighting a lawyer who had learned their game. They were fighting a lawyer who had spent a decade mastering their game specifically in order to destroy it from inside. The methodology has a few consistent elements. The first is what people in legal circles have come to call Luna logic, the ability to map a defense strategy in advance and construct the plaintiff's case around the spaces the defense will occupy rather than the spaces they have already occupied. By the time the defense is making its arguments, Mera has already built around those arguments in a way that makes them self-defeating. The more they defend, the more thoroughly they are enclosed. The second is her use of what she has described, in one of the rare interviews she has given, as historical architecture. She does not look for the recent evidence that a company has been doing wrong. She looks for the original decision, the moment, years or decades before, when someone in a conference room calculated that the wrong thing was the financially optimal choice. That document, that email, that footnote, that meeting note, that is the kill switch. Everything since has been consequence. The origin is where the case lives. The third element is the one nobody outside her firm discusses publicly because discussing it publicly would be counterproductive. Mera has, throughout the 11 years of Luna Legal Group's operation, received information from sources she does not name and does not expose. Confidential documents, internal communications that should not be accessible to any plaintiff's counsel. Whistleblowers who have chosen to trust her with information that, in other hands, might not go anywhere, but that in her hands becomes the foundation of a landmark case. She has never asked where the information comes from. She has never needed to. She receives it. She verifies it through independent means until it can be used, and she uses it. The source is protected. The case goes forward. The defendant falls. The personal cost of the work is the part Mera discusses least and thinks about most. She has no long-term relationship. She has had 3 in the 11 years of the firm's operation, each of which ended for variations of the same reason. She was not, in any of them, more present than the work. Not because she did not want to be, because the specific quality of focus that makes her exceptional in a courtroom is not a quality that can be switched off at the end of the working day and replaced with a different quality of presence. She is always thinking about the case. She is always, on some level, solving. She lives in a penthouse in Midtown Manhattan with a view of several of the companies she has taken to trial. She has a standing appointment with a therapist every Wednesday evening that she has kept, with 3 exceptions, for 4 years. The therapist asked her once what success looks like to her. She said, "It looks like the next case." The therapist asked, "And what does rest look like?" Mera thought for a while. Then she said, "I don't know yet. I'll let you know when I find out." She has not found out yet, but she has won 31 times, and the 32nd case is already on her desk. She has already found the kill switch. That is the story of Mera Luna, the girl who watched her father lose everything, the attorney who spent a decade learning how they did it, and the woman who has spent 11 years making them pay. Drop a comment below. What do you think of Mera? Is she a hero, a necessary force, or has she become, as she sometimes wonders herself, too much like the people she hunts? Tell me where you land. This is one of those stories where the answer is not simple, and I want the real discussion. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, right now, hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone. We are here every single week with stories that make you think about power and justice and the cost of both. I'll see you in the next one.